Water is vital to all life on Earth, and bottled water purports to be an easy, affordable way to carry a healthy beverage with you as you go about your daily life. But is it really easy, affordable, and healthy, or is it a problematic attack on the health and human rights of people across the planet? Join us as we talk about the dangers of commodification of water through the documentary Tapped. You're listening to Real Stories, Real Problems with Rachael and Roxanne.
How you doing today, Rachel?
I'm good. How are you, Roxanne?
I am fine. When I heard that we were doing this documentary this week, my brain flashed back to when my dad was still alive in the 80s, and he walks in holding Newsweek, I think it was, and he goes to, little 17, 18-year-old me. He goes, "You are not going to believe what they're charging for now." And I couldn't guess. And he went, water. And I thought he meant the water bill, that goes with PSE&G, part of the utilities, board of utilities. And I went, yeah, and he goes, no, no, you don't understand. They're selling bottled water for whatever price it was in the 80s. And he showed me the ad, and it was Poland Springs. That was the first one I saw. And I went, well, that's never going to catch on, which shows my business acumen at age, 17. He was livid because this is a man that grew up during the Depression and drank out of the East River. I mean, that man had practice germs coming out of his ears. And he made it through the whole Navy going through these horrible countries, all these overseas countries, never sick a day in his life except for childhood diseases when they didn't have cures back in the 30s, but he was thought this is the biggest ripoff, and he goes, what are they going to do with the bottles? That's more plastic for the landfill. And then he got all Ralph Nader on me. So, but when I heard that, I was like, damn, I'd heard of Perrier, the sparkling water. Stupidly, I thought it was like a high class drink. It was like, like I said, like sparkling water. But no, it's tonic water with a flavor. It's seltzer water with a flavor. So, yeah, I want to tell my dad, remember when we wanted to punch him in his undead face for not
Yeah.
telling me I was rich growing up? Now I wanna, like, say to his undead face, "Yeah, dad, you're right."
Yeah, this watching this documentary, I had moments that I flashed back to from growing up and then being in college and early in the workforce in the early 2000s. There had
Mhm.
been a big shift in the way that people perceived tap water. And when I was growing up, tap water was the thing. We drank out of hoses in the yard because we were playing outside. Um, and but when I got to college and when I got out into the working world, there was this kind of universal understanding that tap water was yucky and you should be drinking pure bottled water. And at one point, I was at work I was working in New York City, which has some of the best tap water in the nation. And I had a big cup that I was trying to drink out of during the day. Like it was a very large tumbler type thing. And the kitchen faucet or whatever in my office was broken. So I walked down the hall to the bathroom where we had the big shared, 6 stalls for the whole floor, all the offices on that floor. And I was
Right.
filling up my cup of water out of the bathroom tap. And a woman came in and she just looked horrified. And she
My
was like,
god.
"You're going to drink the tap water?" And she looked, it sounded like she said, "You're gonna lick that rat you found on the subway?" Like it was
Right,
this,
you're going to hell.
yeah, yeah. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna drink the tap water. That's what the tap water is for
Been doing
drinking."
it my whole life. Mhm.
Yeah, so there was definitely a shift in public perception, and it was
Definitely.
shortly before this documentary was made. That would have been for me like 2007, and this documentary came out in 2009.
Right.
And so for in 2009, just to catch everybody up with what was going on then, the
Yeah, take
very
us there.
the very first block in the blockchain of cryptocurrency was created. It was Bitcoin. That was the origin of Bitcoin was 2009. That was the year that Captain Sully Sullenberger landed the U.S. Airways Flight 1549 on the Hudson River and rescued 155 people from a plane crash. That was also the year that the outbreak of H1N1, the swine flu, became a
Yeah.
global pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
That was the year that Barack Obama became the first African American to be president of the United States. And that January of 2009 was the worst month of the Great Recession.
Hmm.
800,000 jobs were lost, and the unemployment rate rose to 7.8%, which was the highest it had been since June of 1992.
Hmm.
So, in the midst of all of that, this documentary came out. This documentary is called Tapped. And fun fact for people who have listened to other episodes, our episode Get Smart with Money, the woman who directed that, Stephanie Sotig, she
Hmm.
directed this one too.
Great. Okay, that's interesting to know. I had not noticed that.
Yep, so we're checking back in with Stephanie, seeing more of her work. But yeah, this documentary was predominantly set in Maine, but they did touch in Atlanta and California and Arizona and a couple of other, places. But they talked
Sure.
mostly about the water mining, which is what they called it, which is right now surface water, lakes and rivers and that sort of thing, is all protected by the law. It's part of public trust. But
Right.
groundwater is ruled by absolute dominion, which means that whoever comes in with the biggest pumps, they own that water and they can
See,
pump
when
it out
you
of the
said
ground and do whatever
when
they
they
want
said
with it.
water mining, I pictured like the guy on Green Acres with his divining rod, out there looking, and it's dipping toward the water is his dousing rod. It was just that what came into my head.
Yeah, when I heard water mining, I imagined like giant drill bits digging down into the earth, like, what you would mine for coal or iron ore.
Eric?
But yeah, this was just whoever gets it first and has the biggest pumps and the most access, they own, for lack of a better term, the groundwater.
But do they
And
own the mineral rights though? Because the mineral rights only go down a certain number of feet. So that would be that's I should have looked into that before we started because that's fascinating to me.
yeah, I didn't get quite that far. But essentially, this documentary could have been called Nestle is the Devil. And it
Uh,
would have been very accurate and the same content. Wouldn't have had to change a word of the documentary. Be because Nestle is the company that came into Maine, and we talked to the people in the town of Freiburg, Maine, where Nestle does a bunch of groundwater mining, and
Mhm.
they are destroying the water and the environment in Freiburg, Maine, and other cities in Maine. And
Sure.
Nestle is taking these communities to court to legally take away water rights from communities across the country and force residents to buy back water that already was on the land where they live.
So they stole it and they kind of held it for ransom, and now they're making the rightful owners buy it back again.
Yep.
That's not how capitalism works. What is wrong with these people? I
Well, no,
mean,
I think that's exactly how capitalism works, is the problem. That's not how it's supposed to work.
right, right,
But yeah, so we talked in this documentary about the damage being done to these communities. And we talked
sure.
to The director of Food and Water Watch and the president and CEO of the International Bottled Water Association and a senior attorney at the NRDC, like they talk to everybody. And the whole time, like, because I had gone through and found a cast list before I watched the documentary, and it said
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King was in the documentary, and I was like, oh, this is going to be good. And it's set in Maine. Clearly, they're going to talk to Stephen King. No, this Stephen
There you
King,
go. Exactly. Right. And I
this,
think I wrote in parentheses on the Google Doc something like, "Oh God damn it. That would have
yeah,
been awesome."
Stephen King in this documentary is a
Yes.
toxicologist, not Stephen King the horror writer. But,
Right.
still good. Just not the one I was
Still,
expecting.
yes.
And so when we saw this documentary, they had some statistics that they shared. By 2030, two-thirds of the world will be lacking access to clean drinking water. And Americans bought more than 29 billion bottles of water in 2007. And gallon for gallon, bottled water is more expensive than gasoline. And bottled water is 1,900 times more expensive than tap water.
2030, it's only 5 years away. That's Black Mirror shit right there, you know.
Yeah, and so far they don't appear to be wrong. Like, we've
Right.
had massive droughts and issues with people having access to functional water for a long time. And
Mm-hmm.
but with the whole situation like in Flint, Michigan and these other places where the municipalities are allowing the water to be toxic and non-potable, and then Nestle and other major organizations are coming in and pumping out the groundwater that they could be drinking. It's just a mess.
Well, we had that here in my hometown about 6 months ago. There was a chemical spill in well, first of all, my state is the biggest pharmaceutical cap it's the capital of the world, the pharmaceutical headquarters capital of the world, which means testing, which means, trial and error, lots of chemicals. Something happened, something got in the water. The governor actually came and declared it a state of emergency. So that meant not only, no showering, no brushing of teeth, no toilet flushing, certainly no bathing. So what we all did was, if we had relatives close by in like Pennsylvania or Delaware, we would go to their houses if we had relatives there to do all of our ablutions. But it was stuff like coffee, uh-uh, tea, cocoa, anything, any drink made with water. And of course, all drinks are made with water, even beer, but fortunately, beer, the breweries are states and states away. So, like, what are we supposed to do? Day drinking? No showering. The stuff that came out of the faucets smelled awful. Not like that chlorine smell, which to me is kind of comforting, actually. But things that should not be in your water. And when the governor comes on and says that there's a problem, there's a freaking problem. I couldn't wash my hair. It was like all stringy. I had to use the dry shampoo from my store. But when your hair is 2 feet long, it's too heavy to like do that puffing up thing. So I look like a hobo. Everybody looked like a hobo. It's like we just got out of quarantine again. It's like my adage that when you break a bone or something, you never realize how often you use that body part until it's disabled. You never realize how much you use water. I was taking my medication with orange juice and Coke that I got but the big thing was the bottled water that went off the shelf. I would go to Costco and I'd see carts and carts of these crates of bottled water. And it reminded me of the panic buying right before lockdown. These people were using the bottled water to wash with and stuff like that. It was scary because we didn't know how long it was going to last.
Yeah. And they actually talk in the documentary about situations like that. They spoke to a woman who worked with a municipality about water testing and about how bottled water that is produced in a state and sold within that same state does not
Mm-hmm.
cross state boundaries and so then is not held to FDC standards. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so they don't test it. And they could
Right.
have been in your town bottling up nasty, toxic bottled water and selling it through the state, and nobody would have tested it. Nobody would have known until they
Right.
tasted it and it tasted like crap.
Right.
And she
For a
talked about,
90% markup. Mm-hmm.
yep. And she talked about how the municipalities have to test the water multiple times a day. So your water's being
Yes, they
tested
did.
like 40 or 50 times a week when you are
Mm-hmm.
getting the water through your tap. But the
Right.
bottled water companies don't have to test when they're selling within the state. And even when they're selling across state lines, they have lobbied in such a way that there is one person in the federal government who is in charge of monitoring and testing and following up on all of the bottled water sales across the United States.
She must be exhausted. And
Yeah.
when you're the only one on a commit, and I've been on committees of one, you miss things. You're so tired. You've been staring at the same data for days on a computer where you can't really catch errors. You're going to miss things. You're going to transpose two numbers. You're going to put a decimal point in the wrong place. And it's not your fault. It's their fault for not giving you any help. Shit, hire some temps to come in and double check your work.
Yeah, but she can't. And or I
No,
guess
I know
he,
she
I
can't.
don't know who's doing it now, but that person can't because their budget is
Right.
limited. And honestly, with the recent spate of Doge employee cuts, I don't know if there's anybody doing that job at all anymore.
That's an excellent point, too.
Um, so it was the point that they were making was that the water that you're getting from your tap is infinitely safer than anything that you're
Right.
getting through bottled water, not only due to testing, but because the bottling process is exposing you to petrochemicals because it's being held in that plastic. And if that plastic bottle of water is sitting in the trunk of your car for a week or two, it makes it that much worse. You're putting
Sure.
that much worse stuff in your system and you can kind of smell and taste it if it's been sitting in your trunk for a while. But even like brand new off the shelf out of the refrigerator in the store, you are being exposed to BPA's and other chemicals within that bottled water that are really dangerous for you. And
Sure.
I,
I mean, bacteria, which you can't really see, it loves moist, warm places to grow. And yeah, I mean, a great much a lot of bacteria will not hurt you because you've got these wonderful probiotics in your system that'll go, ew, no, get out of here. The white blood cells will do their job, but you only need one. Ebola, dengue fever, Lassa virus. I can go on and on, but yeah, why would you want to even do that? Why risk that, you know?
yeah. And then everything that you're getting in a plastic bottle now also comes with microplastics, which I don't know that we understood to be a thing in the 80s when this really started to become a like product for sale on the market.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at one point in the documentary, they showed all of the plastic waste that's in rivers and in streams, and they're showing how it's breaking down, and all of the plastic waste that they're pulling out of fish that they're eating, which is
Oh,
essentially plastic sand, is what they called it, where it's
yeah.
broken down to like the size of a grain of sand.
Sure.
And it was just surreal. According to the research conducted by Orb Media, 93% of the 11 bottled water brands that they sampled all showed traces of microplastics. And the study included like big names, Aquafina and Evian and Nestle Pure Life. And um, their research showed that bottled water contained about 50% more microplastics than tap water,
Right.
which is a huge deal because we're now understanding that microplastics, even past the blood-brain barrier, they get into every bit of everything. And now there have been stories about newborns being tested and they have microplastics in their system because the mother had them.
Yeah, remember when all we had to worry about is whether or not our mom smoked and drank while she was pregnant? And it's kind of the same thing because like when I was born in 67, the doctors would come into the examining room puffing cigarettes. Didn't know then that whatever went into the mother went into the baby. They had no idea. So that's why a lot of people of my generation are kind of fucked up. There's a lot. I mean, I have a very mild congenital deformity in which my right knee turns out just a little, and I've learned to compensate for it. But you should see me stand on one leg. Ed calls me, I look like a whooping crane because I do. First time he saw it, he went, ah,
Oh my goodness, that's too funny.
yep. Yes. So, but you do look, but of course, I mean, I know you don't remember it because you weren't alive, but the thalidomide babies,
Ah, yeah, I
oh,
actually did some research into that for another unrelated to this podcast project. And that's really one of the times where the American Food and Drug Administration and such really stepped in and made the right choice because
yeah,
America wanted to bring thalidomide. The pharmaceutical companies wanted to bring it to the US. And they said,
right.
no, no, we're not going to do that yet. And then all of the thalidomide babies in England were born and were just completely deformed.
Right. Right. And America's like, nope, we've got our own thing for hyperemesis. Thank you. Thanks for trying. Next time.
Yeah, and it was it was a hard thing to watch some of this. And at one point they're talking about the BPA in the bottles. And they threw out the phrase BPA and its effects on estrogen. And I thought, excuse me, what? And I went and I looked it up, and apparently exposure to BPA over the years is causing women to start perimenopause early, and it's causing us to go into menopause earlier, and it's really messing with our hormones in ways that are dangerous for our bodies. And as somebody who's in perimenopause, I just want to kick the people in the bottled water industry directly into the sun.
It's their fault. You're like this.
Yeah, I mean, granted, genetics and other things, that it is what it is. But the fact that BPA plays such a big part in that, and they found that even in tiny, tiny, like microscopic doses, at like I think they said 2,500 times below the approved amount that the government allows to be in food and stuff, still, still causes problems.
Oh, definitely. My menopause was quick and easy. 56-year-old and then just done. Just stopped. But I didn't start to get hot flashes until a year later. And here I was. I thought, this is it. It's going to be a quick and easy menopause. I mean, there was no intermittent bleeding. I didn't have mood swings, but dear God, the hot flashes. Now I know why my mom, when she was home alone, she'd literally take her shirt off because it would come on so fast,
Yeah.
and the night sweats and all of that. And I should get HRT, but but that's something you would not associate with chemicals in water. Water, menopause. What?
Yeah.
And I know that menopause and postmenopause, they're supposed to drink more water. That's something that, your gynecologist will tell you. But it's like, but what if it's poisoning me? I to do that.
Yeah, and perimenopause, I keep having a thing that I'm like, I want to say this, and then half a second later it's out of my head. I'm gonna blame the bottled water.
Oh, good, good. There you go. Ooh, can I blame my probable ADHD?
Sure, why not? But Nestle was the focus of
Oh,
this documentary, and for good reason. They are the largest bottled water company, and they do most of the harvesting or mining of water in the U.S. and
harvesting
across the world.
with a scythe going through the yeah.
But also Nestle, just as a company, they have their approach to everything is that fuck you, give me your money. And to the point where the big thing that everybody knows about Nestle is that they went into African nations in I don't want to say the 60s, maybe the 50s, and gave away free samples of infant formula to mothers, just enough so that they would lose their milk supply, and then charged them through the roof and ended up with dead, dying, undernourished babies because they couldn't afford the the formula. But they had Nestle went in knowing they were going to kill these women's milk supplies, that they would not be able to feed their babies. And then they didn't have access to clean water to mix the formula. They didn't have access to regular formula shipments. There are babies across the African continent that died because Nestle wanted that money. They saw a way to get that money.
Oh, holy medical malpractice, Batman. So they would take the babies away so the women's milk would dry up
Yeah,
and
not that they would take the babies away, but they come in and they're like, "Here's formula. It's better for your baby. Give your baby formula." And they would give them like 2 weeks worth, just to the point so
right.
that you're not breastfeeding and your body understands that it no longer has to produce milk, and
Okay.
it starts to dry up. And then you can't feed your baby because you are no
Sure.
longer lactating.
Right.
So they came in and they gave you just enough to stop your lactation to force you to buy formula for the next 12 months.
I and the babies were they disfigured or were they developmentally challenged?
Probably developmentally challenged, but for sure a lot of them died because they didn't have access to clean water. So they were mixing formula with dirty water because that was the only way to feed their babies.
Right, to make it
And
liquid form.
a lot of them could not afford the formula. So they would cut the formula back into halves or thirds to stretch it out. But you can't do that to a growing baby. That's Babies need those nutrients and those calories in a way that you can't deny them of that. And so these babies are starving. They're exposed to these nasty germs and parasites and things in this dirty water. And Nestle went in knowing that this was going to happen and that they had these people over the barrel because you will pay to feed your child before
Sure.
anything else.
Before you feed yourself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it does not surprise me that a company that thought this was a great idea came into the United States and went into Maine and other states and said, you know what, all your water is mine now.
It's like what the settlers and the colonists did to the American Indians. You know what? All this land is mine now. Go away.
That,
it
that's
just,
exactly
you
right.
know. Now, did they offer? Because I didn't hear this part. Maybe I missed it. Did they offer any sort of pecuniary compensation to these people?
Nope, they offered nothing.
Oh God, I hate us. I really do. With every one of these documentaries I have. Let's week let's please do another episode of a TV show.
Next week we're doing a fun one though. It'll be fun.
it'll it'll be fun. We don't want our readers or leaders, listen to me. We don't want our listeners to go and go, well, that was a drag.
Yeah, this was it was really weird, and they talked about not just the water, but the bottling of the water and the chemicals
Yes.
that go into that, and the process of processing these petrochemicals and the damage that does to the places around them. And I wrote one note. Let's see. They were talking to a gentleman from the FDA, and
Yeah.
he had talked about he was told by his supervisors that he was not to go out into the community and ask people about problems they were having because they were in Corpus Christi, and where
Okay.
their mining and drilling for this oil and processing it into these petrochemicals to create the bottles. He
Sure,
said, do
sure.
not go into the community and ask. If people call of their own accord to file a complaint, then we can do something. But you do not solicit complaints. And
Complaints, right.
so he ended up quitting that job because he felt so awful. But he threw out the term sacrifice zone. And I thought, what's a sacrifice zone? And I went and looked it up. A sacrifice zone is an area where residents are disproportionately exposed to environmental hazards and pollution with little or no protection from those risks. These are generally low income and minority communities and are located near industrial sites or military bases that produce hazardous chemicals. And they literally, these areas are called sacrifice zones because the people there are going to die and get cancer and be sick for their entire lives. And you can't sell a house. Once you've realized that your property is in this toxic area and you're all getting cancer, nobody wants to buy that house. You are stuck there forever because
Right.
all of your money.
Be aware of the real estate agent that wants to sell you a 9-room house for 300 bucks.
Yeah.
And but what that part reminded me of is in the 60s, all well 50s, all the way up to the 70s, the experimentations that they were doing on prisoners for more for drugs and things like that, because they couldn't get away. That was like the main thing. They couldn't get away. They had very little family. They had no money. They were stuck there for years and years and years. Most of them were minorities. A lot of them had drug problems. A lot of them, had mental illness, and mental illness in prison is not a good thing. And they were promised things like, okay, if you don't die, we'll give you 6 months off your time, or we'll increase your TV privileges. And, in prison, any little thing is wonderful. And they never tell them the truth. It's like, you're going to try this new dandruff shampoo. And it wasn't, we're going to try this new antibiotic cream, and it wasn't, and most of them were illiterate. They couldn't understand what they were signing. I do a whole unit on this in my class. It's
Yep.
awful.
Yeah, that I'm reminded of in the beginning of COVID when the vaccines really started to be produced, and they started really administering them in mass. There was a significant hesitation on the part of minority communities to go and take the vaccines until the wealthy white people went and did it first. Because when you think back about things like the Tuskegee Airmen and the like
Oh,
the
yeah.
that
The
they
syphilis, sure.
America has a history and a habit of harming and testing on um, minority people because
Right.
they can, and we're horrible bastards, and it just is unreal to me. And seeing sacrifice zones in this documentary where they talked about that was very upsetting to know that these people were in this situation. And my family actually, we dealt with something very similar to that. When my daughter was little, we moved from New York to another state and we bought a house. We got settled in. Within 6 weeks of our buying a house, the gas and oil company Spectra came in and announced they were building a compressor station near our home. And a natural gas compressor station is where they vent natural gas to prevent explosions along the pipeline.
Right. Yeah. Mhm.
So they wanted to put it in about half a mile from our house. And we freaked out. We joined the groups, fighting against it. But in the end, we weren't going to be able to stop it. So we sold our house and left. And the day we sold our house, I was so happy, but I was so sad I cried because I have now
Sure.
condemned some other family to living half a mile from this compressor station and dealing with all the cancer and negative side effects that are going to come from breathing in all of that crap all of the time.
I'm glad none of you ended up with three heads. That's the plus part,
Yes.
but I totally understand survivor's guilt because that's what you had. You had survivor's guilt.
Yep. It's just awful. And that I was not able to defend my property. I was not able to protect my family because a
Yeah.
large company wanted to harm people and so we could go fuck ourselves. Like that
Yep.
was so unpleasant. And I remember my husband and I would lay in bed at night and cry together because we had an infant child and
Sure.
we were dealing with all of this stuff. We never should have been put in that situation. Nobody should ever be put in that situation.
The real estate agent, I mean, you could have had a suit against the real estate agent. This couldn't have been a surprise to her or him.
Well, we actually found out about it very early. I don't know that a real estate agent would have known.
Oh.
And it wasn't, the compressor station didn't even get built before we left because
Oh, okay.
we were successful in putting them off and putting them off and putting them off, but it came became clear that it was going where it was going and there was no stopping it.
Sure.
And so that's when we left. And I still have the occasional nightmare
Yeah.
about that whole situation. And when I was talking to my therapist last week,
Mhm.
we were talking about that I have not felt safe in a decade, maybe more,
Mm-hmm.
because we went from that house with the compressor station being built to the first Trump administration directly into COVID and
COVID.
and then directly into the second Trump administration. And that's just the global stuff. That's not the stuff within my day-to-day life that's been hard. That is just the global world that I live in. And that
Mm-hmm.
I probably have a form of chronic PTSD.
I can't believe you just said that. Go ahead, finish, and then I'll explain.
Yeah, so I now have a workbook that I'm using to try to help calm my nervous system and help me better understand my thoughts and stuff to deal with the chronic PTSD because I legit have not felt safe
Mm-hmm.
for 10, maybe 15 years.
It's I had my psychiatrist today, and I was talking about, I'm scared all the time, which feels different than anxiety. I mean, I've had anxiety my whole life, and I can tell the difference between chemical anxiety and situational anxiety. It feels different. And, she was like, "Well, what are you anxious about?" I went, "Trump." I said he's only been in office for like a few months. We have 3 years and 8 months of this left. Are we even going to be here tomorrow? What's going to happen to me? I'm homeless. Am I going to be put in a concentration camp like he's threatening? And all this stuff came pouring out. And, she says, "Well, we have a system of checks and balances." I'm like, "No, we don't. He owns everything. He bought the Supreme Court. He's bullying, he's bloviating, he's threatening, he's blackmailing, he's bribing. I'll never ever be convinced he didn't buy the first election. I'll never be convinced of that." And she said, "It's funny, Roxanne." She goes, "There has been a huge uptake in people seeking mental health treatment because of Trump anxiety, especially women, people of color, homosexuals, transgender. It's basically everybody except rich white Christian men, And so she said, just, try to calm down. I went, "Calm down? I don't even know if I should bother looking for a job." Well, what's gonna happen? So I think we all have survivor's guilt. It's awful. I haven't felt, like you said, safe in years. even when I was living on the street and sleeping in doorways and eating out of dumpsters, I wasn't this afraid.
Yeah. Um, and it is so hard. If you take any kind of regular prescription medications,
Oh
now
yeah.
they are reducing the people who are checking for quality control in that.
Mhm.
If you eat food that's produced in the United States, they're now reducing the regulations that go along with that. So you can now have even more listeria and salmonella and stuff in your food.
One trips at groceries. Groceries, it's a beautiful word. It's an old-fashioned word, groceries.
It,
I do an alarmingly good Trump.
yeah, I feel like we are all at a point where it is not safe to be here, and we all feel that, and we're all dealing with it. And I now kind of understand, looking back in history, you see these moments where horrible things were happening, and people were just ignoring it. And I never really understood why people
Hmm.
would see these injustices and ignore it. And now I get it, because if you don't ignore it and pretend it's not happening, you are frazzled and sick all the time.
Right. And fear. If you spoke out against the Nazis in WW2, your own children could turn you in. Everybody was afraid to say something. Russian Revolution. Can I see your papers? Yeah, definitely. No, I haven't been this afraid since King Ronnie was on the throne and we were all determined, destined for nuclear war. Yeah,
Yeah, and so just all of this nonsense and fear and terrible stuff that has been happening for a very long time. It's been very triggering for me. And then
sure.
seeing this documentary just reminded me of our fight against the environmental damage that was being done by Spectra in my neighborhood all those years ago. And seeing these communities in Maine and in Arizona and in California and all of that who were trying to fight to maintain their water rights.
Yeah,
And there was nothing they could do. They had no power because they were not the major company.
sure. I mean, Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Wouldn't work. Would not work today.
Yeah, and when we're watching the the petrochemical plants and then the water mining, and then they showed what happens with the bottles, the
Yeah,
billions of bottles, and that while technically they can be recycled, the vast majority are not. And
right.
there are some states, mine is one of them, that have bottle fees and where
Hmm.
they charge you an extra 5 or 10 cents for the whatever you're buying, and then you can return the bottle to get that money back. And
Yeah. No
that
deposit, no return. Right.
and that costs the companies that produce the product an extra, I think they said a penny a bottle. And
Hmm.
so they hate it.
Hmm.
They absolutely hate bottle returns. They fight against it in every state that considers it. But it's a really excellent way of keeping that plastic out of the landfills and out of the garbage, because even if you as an individual are not recycling those bottles, anything you throw out in public, there are homeless people going through collecting those bottles to return them and get the money, and there's, all of that stuff. So it creates an incentive for people to keep that plastic out of the water and out of the ground.
Yep.
And but they showed the images of the plastic just running through the streams, and they talked about the plastic island or garbage island out in the Pacific.
I know. And it's funny because Ed told me when I told him we were doing this for a podcast, he went, "Oh, oh, please mention something for me." I was like, "What?" It drives him crazy, right? When he finds bottled water that are only half empty, that people just leave places. This is his thing. This is his little OCD thing because he can't bring himself to throw away a, so he always opens it and like waters a plant. or something. He doesn't just fill on the ground. He waters a tree or something like that. I was like, oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, and the packaging is what you're paying for. The water comes free out of your tap. The $20 a month that you pay for water and sewer to your town, your municipality, all the water that
Hmm.
comes through your tap is essentially free.
Well,
Um,
sure.
and so you were paying for the packaging and the convenience of being able to buy a bottle of water at the store
Right.
to drink on your way home.
Right.
Um, and they talked about the value of the reusable tumblers and cups and bottles that you can wash at home. And I do love that, though I will say for about 4 years, my daughter had a thing where she was little, she was a kid in elementary school, and you would give her a refillable bottle. And it would come home and it would be broken or the top is missing or whatever. And so you'd have to buy another one. And about the sixth one that you buy in a 4 month period, you're like, nope, you're getting plastic bottles.
She
Because
was 8.
yeah, she was little. She had no concept of the responsibility of the reusable bottle.
She didn't understand multinational corporation capitalism.
Yeah, so now she's at a point where she has the huge hydro flasks, and
Oh, yeah.
and so she loves that, and that's a good choice for her. But but for a few years, I can see the benefits that can come with plastic bottled water in this way,
Mhm.
but overall, it's just such a net negative for people and the planet. And they said that 40% of the bottled water you buy is just filtered tap water anyway. So you're paying a premium, a huge premium, for what comes free out of your own house.
Just attach a Brita filter, to your kitchen faucet, and there you go.
Yep. And some places don't even need a filter. If you live in most New England areas, a lot of the Northwest, probably I'm thinking Michigan, Minnesota. Well, maybe not Michigan, they have some water issues, but like
Yeah,
Minnesota,
Flint. Mhm.
um, there are places where the water quality is incredibly high. And then there are
Right.
places like Florida. We talked about the Florida water that tastes like it poured out of Satan's butthole. Um,
Same as all right. I remember that.
so there are places where I can see the benefit, but filtering it yourself at home to make it potable is infinitely cheaper and better for you than buying the individual bottles of water.
And you get that little limbic system thrill of, I'm helping somebody. And you have a completely different perspective on this because you have a child. I don't. I have no, but when I die, that's it. Everything becomes an after I'm dead problem. But I still think that God or whoever's in charge does like to see me helping my fellow man. While I'm on earth, at least help me. That's why I went into teaching for 30 years. Not only do I love it with all my heart, but I was helping my fellow man.
Yeah, this was a difficult one to watch, and it did not offer any like ray of hope at the end.
And I learned a lot, though. I
Yes,
learned a lot, and maybe there are some things that I can do in my daily life to make a smidge of difference.
yeah, and now since we watched this, I now think twice when I'm at the store if I'm like, oh, I could grab a bottle of water for the ride home. No, I'm okay. I don't need it. I'll be fine. I'll
Right.
be home in half an hour.
Take a tumbler, fill it with the tap water, and just suck on that while you're doing it.
Yep. So this was not an easy watch, and it didn't come with fun happy at the end, but it
No,
was still good. It was still important. And I feel like I'm glad I watched it, and
me
I'm
too.
hopeful that other people will take the time to watch it too. But thank you for listening to Real Stories, Real Problems with your hosts, Rachel and Roxanne. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the commodification of water and the documentary Tapped. Join us again next week for a glimpse into another financial problem and a documentary all about it. If you enjoyed our show today, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave us a review on your podcast app. Thanks for listening. See you again next week.
Bye for now.